many hidden areas in the world, places just beyond the veil of what is known and what is unknown. When you live your entire life in warmth, safety, and predictability, then the veil feels like it's hundreds or even thousands of kilometers away, a mystical barrier that lies in the ever more mystical far, far away. But move even a few centimeters away from your comfortable life, and you will realize just how close the veil is to you. Have you ever made a wrong turn when walking home, finding yourself down a street that you have never seen in your life, full of dark houses that look like they are hiding something that you cannot believe, full of lies that you have never touched and you hope will never touch yours, even though you have lived in that town for 20 years? Or maybe you are in a computer lab at your university, working late on a project that needed to get done for that night, and you are certain that you're the only one there. The last night class ended hours ago. Only security guard sitting bored in his office. And yet, what is that shadowy figure doing entering that classroom? The classroom that you have never seen before, that's full of students. The professor and students are inviting, but you instead turn away because it is so strange, only to never see those students, teacher, nor classroom again. Or maybe you never had anything so esoteric happen to you before. Maybe instead you went to a place where you can see the ocean, and where you can find a part of the beach that is quiet. A place where, despite the perfect day and easy access, no one else has discovered. So, in solitude, you set out your blanket and relax, and look over the placid water of the ocean. No waves, no eddies, and no foam to bother you. Just calm water and quiet beach while you rest. Maybe you get lucky and you see something dark and large move under the water. Too quick to be seaweed, too large to be a shark, and you know that somewhere deep inside of you that it is following you. Suddenly, the crowded beach looks a lot nicer than quiet isolation. There is more in heaven and earth than lies in your philosophy. Most of you will remain in the parts of your world where you are comfortable, where your gods, your morals, your science, and your sanity is never questioned, never challenged, and never endangered. And honestly, that's completely fine. There is no dishonor in remaining comfortable. There is a lot in life where you can grow as a person and learn about the world beyond your own, in safety and comfort. However, that life wasn't the life for me. When I was young, I was exploring and pushing every limit. I explored every centimeter of the woods behind my house by the time I was 9 years old. All 40 acres of that wood. For my rite of passage, I was dropped off in a forest over 50 kilometers away with nothing but a knife and the clothes on my back. I was given 10 days to find my way back home. I made my way back in 7 days, and I brought dinner for my entire family. I enjoyed physical challenges and new discoveries, and sports did not appeal to me. When my father took me fishing, I knew what I wanted to do. The sea offered me what I was looking for, a never-ending challenge, one that would never repeat. Always a new horizon to explore, always a new mystery, and always a story to tell when I came home. When I finished school at 16, I joined up with a fishing vessel. I got bored within a few years, but I learned so much about the sea. As beautiful as she is, respecting her and her ways is the only way you stay alive. It doesn't matter how strong you were back on land. You could lift 1,000-kilogram bags of sand with one arm and split trees in a single strike. The sea didn't care. and would drown you just as quickly if you struggled to lift 1 kilogram. Even so, I watched Machimismo kill many of my crewmates in just the first year. When a storm was coming and the captain was pushing us away from the storm, he was ordering us to put on our life belts just in case any of us went overboard. Odds are the life belts you wore as a child when going into the river looked very different from ours. Yours was worn around your head and shoulders like a reverse backpack, a quick strap or two, and you were set. Our life belts were designed not just to keep us from sinking, but to keep us from sinking in a storm. They were almost full bodysuits that were bright orange with green reflective tape, with beacons that worked with both light, sound, and even radio signals so people could find us. They would keep us warm and reasonably dry while in the storm. Most fishers didn't wear them all the time because it slowed us down. And of course, for a lot of them, if their grandfathers didn't do it a certain way, then they didn't do it either. While I was getting my life belt on, an old timer stood on the bow, clinging on to the railing as he pointed forward. No life belt, no rope to tie him down, just his hand gripping himself onto the railing while he screamed at us all for being cowards. I was new at the time. I never learned his name. All I knew was he was screaming at us for being cowards. Then there was a flash of lightning, and he was gone. Forever. I spoke to the others, and apparently the old-timer never even learned how to swim, because his grandfather never needed to know how to swim, despite the fact his father also drowned at sea. I learned quickly how carelessness would get anyone killed. I also saw someone leave the crew cabins in bare feet. She was just too lazy to put on her shoes, and since it was fine so many times beforehand, she thought it would be fine this time. But the ship moved suddenly, and an errant wave washed onto the deck. Those of us in our boots were able to stay on board. She, on the other hand, washed out to sea. Even though it was a clear day and we spent hours looking for her, we never found her again. My first lesson at sea was every rule and every precaution was paid for in blood. But my next lesson was that even with every precaution taken, it wouldn't guarantee that nothing bad would happen to you. After a few months, I got to know the others on the boat better. My closest work friend at the time was a young man named Achille. He told me how he took the job for his family, but he was going to save up to move into the Seven Cities. He believed he could make a better life for himself there. One night during a particularly nasty storm that appeared seemingly out of nowhere, we did our best to protect our harvest and also ourselves. Achille was prepared just as much as I was. His life belt was on, he was tied down, and he was hanging on just as tight as I was. But still, in that storm, Achille was next to me one moment, and the next, he was overboard. Unlike so many others, I could see him go over. His grip slipped and he grabbed at his lifeline rope. However, the rope snapped in his hand. It wasn't supposed to break, but somehow, in all those millions to one chances, it happened and it broke. Achille went overboard, and I saw his orange life belt in the green and gray water as we passed by, and the storm disappeared just as soon as it appeared. Thankfully, Achille turned on his transponder, and it took us only half an hour to find him. However, he wasn't there. His life belt was there, but torn practically in half. No blood, no flesh, just a long tear, and the transponder still flashing. I still don't know what happened to him or what took him, but that cemented to me how even if you did everything right, bad things could and would still happen. Ashiel did everything right, everything I did, and still compared to the primal power of the sea, it was practically nothing. And then, when I could leave the fishing boat, I did. When I heard there was an opening in the local Hunters Guild. The local chapters of the Hunters Guild had two primary focuses: the hunters who traveled into the forest to deal with those that hid and hunt within those tall shadows. A good paying position, and an adventurous one for sure, but it was the other chapter that really drew my attention. Nicknamed the Whalers by everyone in town, these hunters dealt with what lies beyond the horizon to the east, Oceanus. Even with both good pay and glory, it was a very dangerous position. Being a fisher or sailor of any kind was dangerous. Just by me fishing, I saw 3 deaths, all of them more experienced than me, and that was before pulling up anything supernatural or worse, actively trying to kill you. There was the Draugen, the undead who haunted both our coasts and in the Dead Sea, that needed to be cold and removed before the dead removed our ability to use the seas anymore. Normally they lived underground and on land, but quite a few also used ships and possessed physical bodies, and with great powers, they were one of the most common threats dealt with by the whalers. But they weren't the only ones, nor the most dangerous. There were sea ghosts, who often appeared as wisps of light trying to find their way back home, but instead they usually led ships astray, creating more deaths and more sea ghosts. There were entire ship graveyards, some as large as islands, that were full of sea ghosts, thousands upon thousands of small lights near the sea, outshining and outnumbering the stars above. Usually the sea ghosts were harmless if you weren't led astray. Usually. And then there was the unknown. A great many terrible creatures that were either never or rarely seen. Threats that were never given a name because none of them ever left a witness to name them. Regular sailors were already superstitious, but among the whalers they were a special type of superstitious. There were tales of Ouroboros so large that just by shifting it would cause the plate tectonics to shift. Tales of leviathans so large that they never even noticed the ships that were over them, far too large to hurt, let alone hunt. Monsters so large that they may be mistaken for gods or devils. If you are lucky enough to never catch their attention, you may be able to warn others about the deep ones. But if you are unlucky enough to catch their attention, well, what do you do when a tiny spider catches your attention? Or the tales of islands forming where there were none before, lighthouses built where no human had ever resided before, or entire land masses that would appear where just before there was only ocean, only for these mysterious land masses to disappear soon after, never being added to maps, but still sailors remain cautious. There, for you, may wind up on an appearing island, only to disappear when the island did. Or the worst tales were the ones that came back with curios, little trinkets with odd abilities, some that we can use, others that can never be mastered, and it was never easy to tell which was what. One example was a book made out of gold and silver. Every page is made from very thin gold that would resist all attempts to twist or tear the pages. The writing on all of the pages is made from silver. The silver was used to write in strange markings that didn't correspond to any known language, with drawings of landscapes, animals, and even the stars, all made from silver of different shades. A truly beautiful discovery, and one recovered from the wreckage of a ship that no one had ever been able to find again. But this curio's true power became apparent when people tried to transcribe the words inside of the codex. Any who tried would be compelled to transcribe everything inside of the codex, again and again and again, until they finally passed out from exhaustion, breaking the spell. The transcriptions are safe to handle, but to transcribe directly from the codex is cursed. And this one is relatively safe to work with. Once there was a trident that was recovered from the depths. It was heavily rusted and covered in sea life, but once removed from the ocean, a storm formed over the ship that had the trident on board. The storm would only grow in strength, leaving the ship in the eye of the storm. Within less than an hour, the storm was the size of a hurricane, and it was only growing. At that point, the trident was dropped back into the ocean to let the storm dissipate. It is believed if the trident made it to land, the storm would have kept growing until the entire world was drowned. And as you can tell, all of these warnings of danger only convinced me that being a whaler was the right thing to do. I signed a 3-year contract with the whaler captain who was hiring at the time. He was an older, heavy-set gentleman. He had a round sigil on his chest of a green feathered parrot, the same sigil worn by his crew. When I introduced myself to him, he referred to himself as Jason, and his ship was auspiciously called the Argo. He was apparently a large fan of the classical Argivian myth. He looked over my resume and gave me a few simple questions, just to make sure I had actually spent time on a boat. Too many people with no experience tried to pass themselves off as professional sailors. I was familiar with people like that. But then there were the odd questions that didn't make as much sense to me, such as if there were two moons on the opposite sides of the sky, which was the one to the west? I thought about it and told him it was the one that was to the left of the North Star. Then there was a question that if you heard a call from a crewmate who you knew for a fact was dead, would you heed their call? I informed him I wouldn't think it was my crewmate, but I would still investigate because it may be someone who needed help. This answer interested Jason, who accepted me on board. After just a few more days, we took the Argo to our mission beyond the Northern Circle. Everyone knows about the Northern Forest, a great forest that spanned 3 different continents and dozens of countries. A place so wild and so unforgiving that every member of the League of Nations was forbidden from staking a claim in the forest. Not that it stopped hundreds of small tribal nations from claiming land, nor companies from staking a claim. What most people didn't think about was what it was like in that parallel away from the land. It was here that we called the Northern Circle, the line that encompassed almost 1/6 of our entire planet. Yes, it was cold, full of icebergs, ice floes, and cold weather. They were all here, and it was already dangerous enough. But for some odd reason, It also had the most esoteric creatures anywhere on the planet. Sea monsters, sea spirits, undead, you name it, it probably lives in the Northern Circle. If it was so dangerous, why do we explore it? Because we are human. If you tell us something is too dangerous to do, we will find a way to do it. Whether it's a new technology, old technology, adapting to our environment, or adapting our environment to ourselves. There was so much beyond ourselves that we were eager to learn and discover. Satellite images showed that there were polar ice caps beyond where any human had explored. Every creature we killed or collected was another breakthrough in biology, zoology, or history. This was as far as we could get beyond the veil before leaving for another world of Altis. This specific mission was none so glorious. A private investor had discovered the wreckage of an almost 100-year-old submarine buried into an ice floe. It was believed to be AC-4, the Polyphemus, a ship commissioned by the Empire of the Seven Cities to fight in the Great War. One of the 4 ships of the AC line commissioned for the war. All 4 ships disappeared before they were ever seen in battle with anyone. No survivors, no theories, and no wreckage. Until now, that is. Where the other 3 ships were was unknown at this time, but it was believed by excavating the Polyphemus, we could find out what happened. A large historical discovery that would bring closure to many families. My role in this mission was just another hand on deck. I had enough experience to help with the boat, but I wasn't going to help the research team, who was supposed to do the actual investigating, nor help the whalers who were guarding the research team. On one hand, it was a bit aggravating being ignored by both the hunters and researchers. Have you ever worked in a job where the people in charge of you don't bother to learn your name? They only speak to you when they want something, and otherwise you're just a nameless grunt who is supposed to make sure everything is smooth sailing? Then you know that aggravation. But on the other hand, it was adventurous to be here. The air beyond the northern circle was cold, but so clean. I never imagined that air would smell like this. It wasn't just the clean petrichor of fresh rain over stones. It was beautiful. Even the ocean felt different, still just as ancient and primal, but this ocean felt like it never saw humanity before, and it was still learning if we were one of her children or her meals. I made friends with another deckhand. He had a few more years of experience than I did, but had been doing whaler expeditions for his entire time at sea. His name was Olaf. He had a strange red birthmark on his neck, but he told me about the new tricks of the ocean. All of our thermal underwear was wool, and it had to be wool, not cotton. Wool had the unique privilege of being able to warm your body, even when wet. Cotton doesn't. Even artificial substances don't warm the body like wool. Olaf did also teach me about what it was to make your way up from being a hand to being a whaler. He told me there was something they were looking for in the hands. He wasn't sure exactly what it was because some hands were on for years before being recruited by the whalers, and some were there for a day before being recruited. He didn't know for sure, but he had been with them for nearly 10 years, and they still hadn't recruited him, so he was going to keep doing his best as a hand and hope that will work. The Argo was a unique ship. It was armored, similar to a military ship, with cannons and harpoon guns decorating the deck, with powerful engines to run the ship, and also a powerful sail if the engine ever failed. The ship was also powered by seawater and able to produce fresh water with ease. With all of this technology, I didn't know why sails were necessary, nor why the cannons were still dependent on black powder instead of modern artillery. Olaf's answer to that spooked me. There's places beyond the Northern Circle where modern technology just doesn't work. No electricity, modern guns and bombs are all duds, radios don't work, even modern telescopes are worthless. Hence all the analog backups on the ship. Sails in case the engines failed, old spyglasses in case the modern ones no longer work, black powder and steam-powered guns, just so we can fight even if the explosives fail. The idea that there are places in the world that technology just doesn't work is a new dimension of problems for me to consider. You have to trust in your tools. When tools may fail for no apparent reason, then what do you trust in? I glanced around at the archaeologists poring over their books and the whalers triple-checking their weapons, but the unmistakable camaraderie between the members of the group was there. They trusted each other. Even when their tools failed, they knew that they had each other. That wasn't like how it was for me in the fishing business. I trusted my captain and my crewmates to do something stupid and to do something dangerous. Even payment felt iffy. So, what happened with the hunters that caused them to trust each other so much? I promised myself I would watch and learn. It was a quiet week until we were a day away from the wreck of the old submarine. Then things started to get very strange. I had a nightmare of a deep sea diver exploring a temple of stone underwater. I watched in eerie silence as the diver in his suit, with a long umbilical cord that connected him to a very small submarine above. The submarine was maybe 50 meters long and 5 meters wide. The tether connecting him to the ship looked so tenuous, like a stray current or fish could cut him off from the ship. The diver walked up the steps of the steel, and on top of the stone step pyramid was a single table. And it was here where I went from being an observer to being the copperhead hat diver. I could feel the heavy metal on my head, and the rubber of the suit made me feel claustrophobic. And yet my gloved hands reacted without hesitancy as my hands fished out in front of me, looking for something. The sea above only let in a little bit of moonlight, and my eyes gazed through the darkness to look for something. In my dream, I didn't logically know what I was looking for, but it felt like if I saw it, I would know it. And it was on the stone table in the middle of the top of the steel that I found it. In the middle of the stone table, large enough for someone to lie on, was a knife. It almost resembled a tecapaddle, but instead of being made of wood and obsidian, the handle was made out of a single large piece of nacre, or mother of pearl. The blade itself was made from a single tooth that almost resembled a shark's tooth, but much, much larger. Even the largest megalodon tooth was 18 centimeters long. This tooth was 50 centimeters long, half a meter, more of a short sword than a knife. Something deep inside of my heart told me that the knife was dangerous. But no matter how much I wanted to scream, My voice remained silent as my gloved hands picked up the blade and gently examined the knife. And then, as I picked up the blade and admired it in the small porthole, the sea beyond the temple lightened up like the moon was brightening, and I saw the sea beyond the top of the steel was full of skulls. Some of them were human, but quite a few of them were something definitely not human. The skulls weren't merely in large piles. I saw them coat the entire ocean floor as far as I can see. What I thought were distant stalagmites and underwater mountains turned out only to be piles of skulls, and I had a feeling that the skulls went far, far deeper than they appeared. Billions have died and lost their heads here, either trying to obtain the knife or maybe trying to keep someone from obtaining it. I examined the edge of the knife. Despite being made of tooth, it looked sharper than steel. It seemed like it was this blade that removed every skull I was looking at right now. When this realization dawned on me, I watched as the lights came on in every skull, like they were all waking up and they were now watching me. I woke up at this point. That day it was hushed among the crew. No one felt comfortable talking to anyone. It was unsaid, but I was certain everyone else had the same dream. But if anything, it only persuaded both the archaeological and the hunters teams to keep going. I guess they saw the dream as an invitation of it being something interesting and not something dangerous. It was still late morning when we found the wreckage. It was embedded in a very large ice floe. The tower and hatch were clearly visible, and even the name was visible without us needing to remove ice. It was the Polyphemus. It was barely more than rusty scrap, but still there were loud cheers from the crew, and even I joined in. But after taking a few pictures, began the hard part of excavating the submarine. If this was a movie, we would have immediately found a melted path that would have led directly to the hatch, and we would have all gone inside to discover the mystery of the Polyphemus. But no, this was just an archaeological investigation. So it was going to take a lot of time before even a single person was sent in to try to open the hatch. The Polyphemus was small, smaller than a modern fishing boat, and it was supposed to only fit a crew of 28. So we wouldn't have all fit on board even if we tried. And any investigators sent on board would have needed to prepare against disease and toxic gases from a century of decay and rust. Being in a confined place with rust will consume your oxygen even quicker than you think, and that had to be prepared against. The closest thing we did to getting on board was placing a geotag on both the ice floe and the tower of the submarine. On the day of discovery, the archaeologists just wanted to take in situ photos and geotag the submarine. So if the ice floe moved, then we knew exactly where. Assuming it didn't drift into an area where technology just stopped working. Odds are, archaeologists would spend years just studying the outside of the Polyphemus, while the inside was mapped out centimeter by centimeter, all done by sound. It was a process that, while bored me, I admired it for being safe. That night, we anchored half a kilometer from the ice floe and we opened up bottles of wine for celebration. As a general rule, I stay sober at sea, and most of the whalers agreed with me, but we made a slight exception for the wine. It had no alcohol, and it was tradition to celebrate such a discovery with wine. It was some kind of Vespucci blend that smelled fruity. We all had a toast at the same time. I tasted the wine and savored the grapes for a moment, confused by the bitter aftertaste. The last thing I remembered before colliding with the deck was Olaf lifting his glass while everyone else fainted around him. When I woke back up, I realized it was cold and dark. It felt cramped and I could smell damp steel and old rust. My thoughts felt slow and my entire body was sluggish. Whatever chems we were doused with probably wore off in stages. With great difficulty, I finally brought myself to my feet. My eyes adjusted to the dim light. I was in a rusted corridor. I was lying on a puddle of what I was hoping was just seawater. Step by step, I made my way out of the corridor. Every step was a struggle, but it got easier and easier as the chem burned out of my body. Now, with my thoughts a bit freer, I remembered how everyone else drained their glass in a single gulp. I sipped, and that must have protected me from getting a full dose. But the question remained, why did Olaf dose us and bring us here? Were we on the Polyphemus? I continued my walk down the corridor when I made it to a ladder that led above to the hatch, the way out. I glanced around. The only other thing I saw was another ladder leading deeper into the submarine, probably where the others were being kept. I could get out and maybe get myself out. But even if I succeed, would I be able to drive the ship all by myself home? And even so, I'm not going to leave my crewmates behind. I descended deeper into the submarine. The next level had a lot more people lying on the ground or lying on top of each other. Olaf didn't care about people's comfort. He just wanted them easily accessible. And now was the hard part for me. If you have never tried to carry someone unconscious up two different slippery ladders, just know that I am jealous of you. The first person I brought up, I found out that the Argo was docked next to the ice floe, the gangway connecting the ship to the ice floe. I don't know how Olaf managed to do that all by himself, but I made my way to the deck and laid my crewmate on it. Even after trying to splash water on their face, they didn't stir. Whatever Olaf doused them with was very strong. I looked back from where I was on the Argo back to the Polyphemus. There were 5 archaeologists and 12 other crewmates to help. Was I even able to get everyone back to the Argo? I barely brought one person back, and even with the chems mostly cleared from my head, my muscles were aching, and I knew it was going to get worse. I turned back to the Polyphemus and made my trek across the ice. Even if I couldn't save everyone, I was going to save someone, and I wasn't going to save no one. It took me nearly 4 hours to get everyone back onto the Argo. Every time I heard the metal groan, I paused, worried it was Olaf or maybe the steel was finally breaking after a century of holding out the ice. But nothing happened, and I kept bringing everyone back to the Argo. While I was moving the bodies, I was able to examine the Polyphemus from the inside and realized just how odd the inside of the submarine was. It was clearly modified after the crash. The pipes were cleared out along with the torpedoes, ammunition, engines, and all mechanical components. It was essentially just a rusty iron shell now, with ladders and a few light bulbs, leading deeper and deeper into the submarine. And that was the other part of the submarine that was so odd. The ladders were only about a meter and a half high, and I had to duck between levels. But even with that consideration, there should be only enough space for 2 levels at best. Towards the end, I was 7 levels down, while I looked for my last crewmate, Captain Jason himself. There was definitely something wrong with the submarine. Even modern submarines weren't over 10 meters deep, and every few meters there was a weak light bulb on the wall. There was no possible way that power was still here. Even if Olaf somehow found a functioning power source and turned it on, highly doubtful considering that the submarine was gutted, the wires would have corroded to unusability in the cold sea decades ago. I carried a heavy flashlight and diving knife with me as I descended down onto the 8th level below. This one was the strangest level yet. The walls above were so close I had to walk sideways to fit through, my shoulders too broad to walk through normally. However, on this level, the walls were so far away I couldn't see them. I could still see the rusted floor as I made my way from the ladder to where I hoped Captain Jason was. My flashlight caught the stone table from my dream, and lying on it was Captain Jason. He wasn't tied down, he was still unconscious from whatever he was dosed with. A book lied open next to him. I think it was the Polyphemus's captain's log, and just beyond the table was another ladder, leading even deeper into the Polyphemus. However, unlike any of the others that I went through, this one was full of water. I shined my flashlight into the water, but I couldn't see an end to the ladder. This one went a lot deeper than a meter and a half. If I was to guess, it made its way to the bottom of the ocean floor. I strapped the flashlight to my side as I picked up the captain and the logbook and half dragged, half carried him back to where I came from. When I finally made it to the ladder, I heard splashing from the darkness, and I made the mistake of turning my flashlight into the darkness, and I saw what was making that noise. In the darkness was the copper-headed diver from my dreams, but his suit was much older and much more overgrown than it was in the dream. The rubber was torn in some places and patched with what looked like human skin, still pulsing and alive. From the back of the suit grew large coral that was as red as blood. Seaweed and algae grew from some places and splashed when it hit the ground. But the helmet was the worst part. Through the porthole, I could see Olaf's face behind the glass. His face wasn't angry nor uncomfortable in any way. He looked like he belonged where he was. And then I noticed in his hand was the blade from my dreams. The tip of the tooth dragged across the steel floor, cutting deep into it with no effort. I couldn't hear what he was saying in the suit, but I could see his lips moving. Now, afraid, I quickly shoved Jason to the level above me as I climbed up. I felt the air stir below me as Olaf slashed at me, just missing where I was, and instead of hitting me, he slashed the metal ladder, leaving him with no way to climb back up. At least, that's what I hoped. I continued carrying Captain Jason as I heard the groans of the steel and the stomps of Olaf following. He wasn't running, but he was still too close for my comfort. That suit he was wearing must have weighed over 100 kilograms. I don't know how he was carrying it while he chased us, but the important part was getting Captain Jason out of here. I continued to make my way up the levels, but I could hear the groaning steel getting closer and closer. When we made it to the final level, I could hear the groaning steel and the footsteps just a few steps away, and I could feel the air splitting just behind me. I could see the hatch just ahead of me, and despite myself, a thought occurred to me. I could let Captain Jason go. I would be able to get myself out and save everyone else, or I could let myself die with him, and no one would be saved. In those final few steps before the ladder, I made my choice. I let go of Captain Jason's arm and let him slump to the floor as I ran towards the ladder. I made my second mistake when I turned to see what was happening. Apparently, the chems were starting to wear off as the captain stared at me and tried to reach his hand out towards me, only for it to feebly flop to the ground. I watched as Olaf pulled the captain back into the darkness, and I heard the slams as Jason's head collided with what sounded like every wall and floor of the Polyphemus, all the way down to the bottom of the submarine. I felt like I had to say sorry to him, but I couldn't do it. I wasn't sorry in the slightest. I saved a lot more people than I sacrificed, and that was a win as far as I was concerned. I climbed up the ladder and made it back to the Argo. The others were still while I waited for them to stir, and I started to sail the Argo away from that place of death. While I waited for the others to wake up from being dosed, I read over the logbook, hoping to have some kind of answer for what I saw down there. The first parts of the logbook were pretty normal. Apparently, they were hired to explore an underwater structure past the Northern Circle. The structure was almost 50 meters underwater, and the submarine couldn't quite reach it. So the engineers of the Seven Cities had the ingenious idea of having a copper-hatted diver attached to the submarine who would explore the deep sea. The diver sent into the structure returned with a strange knife. And then the logbook abruptly ended there. I could make my assumptions there. There must have been some kind of possessive nature of that knife. It must have compelled the crew of the Polyphemus to turn on each other, and then it possessed Olaf and compelled him to bring us into the submarine. But there's something else that is bothering me. Why did the blade possess Olaf and leave the rest of us alone? Everyone else seemed normal enough when we got close to the ship. We just had a shared nightmare, But now it's been a few hours since we left the Polyphemus, and we have a few new problems. No one else has woken up. They were stirring just a few hours ago, but now they're all still, and I don't want to get too close to check. They're too still, and if I don't check, then I can keep pretending that they are just asleep. Something else I noticed is the radio. After we left the Polyphemus, the radio began to display a distress transmission. This is Captain Jason of the Polyphemus. We are stranded on an ice floe and we need immediate help. Even when I turned off the radio, it still played the distress signal. Everywhere I went on the Argo, that distress signal still played in my head. It shouldn't be possible. He should be dead. I knew this was a trap. But a small part of me is convinced that he still lives and I can still save him. And when I let my mind drift, I find myself steering the Argo back to the Polyphemus. I don't know what was inside the Polyphemus, but it is inside me now and it wants me to return. And my final concern, the rust. I thought it was just some rust flakes that flaked onto my hands and clothes. But now I can tell the rust is spreading across my skin and numbing wherever it touches. That same rust I noticed is spreading across the bodies of my crewmates and to the Argo itself. Something was inside of that ship that made it onto us, and it wants to spread. As it spreads, I find my thoughts drifting, and I feel less and less human. In the kitchen, I was trying to cut open a can with a cleaver, and the cleaver came down on one of my fingers. No blood came out, and no pain was felt, but I could see the rust clotting where my blood should be. I was so hungry, I couldn't stop myself. Blood, rust. I examined the logbook again. This time I found new pages written in rust. Whether that's because the rust is in my mind and making me hallucinate, or it's just letting me see what is hidden, I don't know. It said the rust is in the blood. It attaches to the iron and spreads to every cell. It spread across the metal and it consumed the crew. The crew took their own rusty blood and bodies to add to the Polyphemus. The captain was too scared to go down into the new levels. He watched as it consumed the ship and crew, and even in his sealed quarters it was spreading and making its way to him. He thought the blade could stop it. He removed his hand when it started rusting, and it kept spreading until he used the blade to remove his wrist. But even though he's rust-free now, his fears will consume him. My heart hurts now. Every beat takes effort, and I can hear scraping with every beat, just behind my ribs. I spat earlier and it clattered on the deck. I didn't bother to check, but rust is spreading there, too. I can't feel my bones, and I can smell the blood of my crewmates. It smells so pure and cleansing. Maybe if I drink just a little, it'll chase the rust away. I can't believe I did that, but it kinda worked. I am trying to focus on steering out of the northern circle, but I won't make it. I am growing tired, and I know if I fall asleep, I will steer us back to the Polyphemus. I already tried cutting the rust out of my body, but it goes deep. Even my bones are coated in it. My body no longer feels pain, and I cannot use pain to stay awake. What I see in the reflection isn't myself anymore. The rust adds something, and it consumes something else. I am sealing my journal in a plastic bag and tossing it into the ocean. I cannot stop the rust. No more clean iron. No more crewmates. I am corruption. Can't remove my hands from the wheel. They're rusted together. I am Argo. I cannot control myself anymore. Captain Jason needs aid. I'm going to go help him. Previous journal was obtained through one of my anonymous sources. To the best of my research, there has been no ship in the Seven Cities registered under Argo. I did discover that the Polyphemus was sunk along with her three sister ships in an undisclosed mission to the Northern Circle. And the distress signal talked about in the journal does occur in the Northern Circle. And all sailors who make it that far north all know not to answer that distress signal. If I discover more information, I will make sure to share it. The Seven Cities Journalist.